I would say entree was via Cal Arts, basically, after I got my MFA. And that was a big decision to come here from New York where I had been living. And because I was very frustrated being an artist in New York, I didn't know how to connect to anything. And I was very intimidated because I didn't think I had enough knowledge and just felt, you know, thoroughly inadequate, blah, 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 that kind of miserable young stuff. So I went to Cal Arts and didn't even know much about it. It was just kind of, because it was 76 when I went. I barely heard of it. And then when I got to Cal Arts, it was just this great miracle of wonderfulness and community and growth and support and yeah, a sense of community, really, and belonging, and a sense of developing faith in my own abilities. So that was all really good. And then when I got out, it was, of course, hard to leave that bubble. Well, my last year, my mentor was Michael Asher. And my first year was Judy Pfaff, but I worked very closely with Doug Hubler. I was his TA. The second year, well, I worked with John Mandel as his TA, but then I did art history TA to Doug Hubler. And Baldessari, and I just had great people. You know, I was super fortunate. When I got out and was floundering, someone from Dorit Sipas's class, Jill Gigerich, who was a good friend of mine, had been, I don't know how she got in Lace, but she was part of this collective called Lace. I don't know that it was called a collective, but she was part of Lace. And they needed, I don't know what there was 10 or 12 of them. And they were funded to make art, more or less, through the CETA funding of the federal government, Comprehensive Education and Training Act. Lace was into it before Leica was. And so you haven't talked to anyone about Lace yet?
No.
Okay, so here's how it began. This is not the definitive history because I wasn't there, and I'm piecing this together as best I can. And I haven't really thought about it for years, so there may be some distortions. But there was a guy named Dan Fleming who worked for the County of Los Angeles, I believe it was the Economic Development Department. And he was somebody who liked art and was in the county government that was administering the CETA funds for the federal government, because the federal grants came through county entities. So the county had this huge amount of money to basically train the unemployed so that they could be employable. It was not set up to help artists at all. It was really set up to help hardcore unemployed, which does include artists, but not as a subset that it was intended to be. So Dan Fleming decided, okay, let's see, I'm interested in art. I see other people in New York were using CETA funds for theater people and dance people and everybody. And he thought, well, let's see, I want to do this here in LA, what do I do? Well, the county and Otis are connected, or they were at that time. I don't know what the connection was, but Otis was run by the county or in county-owned buildings, or it was an entity of the county in some way. So he went to Otis and, I don't know, met people or something. Anyway, got involved with a number of people who were just kind of getting their MFAs at Otis and got them interested in this idea of doing kind of a collective or doing a kind of service that could help them get funds to make their art, but at the same time do something for the community. I don't know, and I believe Robert Gildamontes, who was getting an MFA at Otis at the time, was from East L.A., and he had connections with a lot of the East L.A. people like Gronk and the Oscar people, Gamboa. And so then they assembled this group, a little of this, a little of that, and Dan got them a storefront in El Monte where the idea was to somehow have interface with the community. do murals, do shows, do something. And so that went on for a while, less than a year. They received these checks from CETA through the conduit was something called the Pasadena Community Arts Center, which suddenly bloomed into this giant conduit for CETA funds. And so there was this nonprofit, because LACE at the time wasn't called LACE, nor was it a nonprofit. It was just this group of, let's say, 12 artists who were receiving money from the federal government via the county, via the Pasadena Community Arts Center. Disparate group, the kind of MFAers from Otis, and then the East L.A. people, and then there were a few other ragtag people who seemed way off the grid. When I finally met them, I just thought, well, this is really quite a hybrid of artistic interests and sensibilities and background. It was just hodgepodge city, except they all loved that they got this check every 2 weeks to basically make their own art with some degree of obligation to create programming for the public. But by and large, it was really, here's a check, you get to be an artist, with some obligation. So Jill got pulled into that, I don't really know how. And at the time, Jill got involved, I believe shortly after they'd moved to downtown. They decided that El Monte wasn't a good site. And Robert Gildamontis, I think, kind of was pushing this idea of downtown. And I think found this site at 240 South Broadway above the bridal shop. 8,000 square feet for like $200 a month. And so they moved downtown and changed their focus. I think in El Monte maybe there was a murals program. Then when they came downtown, it came pretty much an exhibition program. And they all showed their work there, so it wasn't like it was just about they would work to show the work of the greater community, although it was part of it. They also were showing their own work and having a combination of shows they put together and shows that they were in. And they hired one of the CETA artists to be the gallery manager. And I believe there was there was at least one gallery manager before I was hired, Sarah Parker. And then she was waiting until a new gallery manager would be hired so that she could become a gallery artist and not have to, because the manager had the dipshit job of having to kind of show up regularly, and it was definitely the bottom of the barrel if you were the gallery manager. But you were then first in line to become one of the CETA artists when someone left. And I think at that time there wasn't even a expiration date on the funds. But people left. Unless there was an exit, I don't remember that. In any event, Sarah left, and Jill said there's this job to be, Sarah didn't leave, she became a gallery artist because one of the gallery artists left. Sarah's leaving, we need a gallery artist, would you be interested? And I was like incredibly interested because I figured I'll take that job and then in 2 months I get to do what she got to do, which was to become this artist and just get this check to be me. And I thought, well, you can't go wrong. So I was hired, they interviewed several people, and I was hired, and like shortly after I was hired, the collective, which was, everything was collective, they sit in a circle at their meetings, Tuesday meetings, whatever it was, and make up the rules. And I sat there as they made the rule, which was the gallery manager could never become an artist. All in favor. All opposed. So, like, in a minute, I became kind of this, as they were seeing it, I was going to be the lackey to keep this machine going for them. So as soon as I realized this was a fixed job, I decided, fuck, I'm going to make it a real job and make this a real situation as best I can, considering that it was still a collective. So that was kind of a epiphany for me. I knew nothing. I didn't have a fuck clue about what managing a gallery. Nothing. Zero. See, I was So I was 30. I graduated in 78. It's 32. So they were all about that age. I would say I was probably older by just a few years. So gradually many things started morphing, obviously. The most important being that the Pasadena Community Arts Center was getting more and more rigorous in monitoring how the funds were used, because Washington was starting to wake up to the fact that these CETA funds were being used by all these artists all over the country for purposes not in the intention of the legislation. So that was happening. And then the legislation was changed to put an expiration on the amount of time that any individual could receive CETA funds. So we were working under more and more constricted rules. But at the same time, a lot was going on. Some people were leaving. Fortunately, I could say this, the real dead wood, kind of, some of them just left in disgust when the Pasadena Art Center said, you know, you have to show up here, you have to this, you have to that, and they just said, you guys don't respect freedom, you guys don't respect the arts, you know, all this kind of insane, delusional rhetoric that people can fall into about their magnificence and why they should be supported. And then there was, I'd say, a more serious group left who wanted to do still would have preferred to just have had the outright stipend. But, you know, I'd say that there was a real interest in running a program that spoke to the intense diversity that was represented in the CETA group. You know, there were where you had your MFAs, which were some from Otis, and then there were a few of us from CalArts. The CalArts people were one flavor. Jim Iserman came on board. Megan Williams. So the three of us had one kind of tone, and the Otis people were kind of another, but we kind of, you know, there were all these subsets. It was kind of interesting. And then there were the East L.A. people, the people who came out of Chicano art, with a set of kind of realities that we really didn't know about. I was extremely interested in that because I had been very political and knew, number one, we were in downtown LA, so we were in the wedding gown district, which was all Chicano, and there were many Chicanos in Lace, and that was interesting and rich. It was very hard. I always found this frustrating. I mean, we talked about this a lot. This was not, you know, with Harry and with particularly with Robert Gildamontes, who, how do we deal with this problem of ensuring greater diversity, more representation from Chicanos? That was the term. Now, of course, Chicanos kind of auteur, but at the time that was the term. So if you look at the history of the programming, there was, you know, there were programs that did address and provided opportunities for Latino artists, and our openings were wild. I would say that was the sense of vitality that a Lace opening represented. It was just breathtaking. There was nothing like it. Nothing. It was completely sui generis, where you would have hundreds and hundreds of people in this environment, an art environment in this 8,000 square foot loft in downtown LA in 1979. It was just so enabling. And we were doing it. Artists were doing it. It wasn't, we weren't the guests of a dealer or a museum, or, you know, we were doing it. So there was this developing sense of power. That's what interested me the most, was the sense of control, that an art institution was controlled, not informed, but controlled by artists. And to this day, I find that one of the most abiding characteristics of the early days of Lace, was that sense of control by artists. So it slowly evolved. It had to become its own nonprofit because the Pasadena Community Arts Center said, we are not going to be your conduit, and you have to start raising your own money. So there were some fundraisers. I don't remember, I don't remember how they raised money. They moved into the building on Broadway, I believe January in '78, and I was hired December '78. What the fundraising had been, I think it was pretty minimal. So I worked on fundraising, and the first thing I did, Mary Jones had proposed something called the Animal Party Show, or the Animal Show. And this was the summer of 1979. And I said, let's do a dinner party with the animal theme. So we just asked every artist we could think of if they would make food. And we sent out the hokiest announcements, you know, that we did kind of at, I think we had the mimeographed. They didn't have Kinko's then, and they certainly, I mean, it was funky town. And we sold tickets for $25, but of course we had to let in all the artists for free, and so it was like 300 artists and 2 paying people, and you know, we sold, it was like funky, who knew? Nothing, didn't know anything. It was so much fun. People just had a blast. Anne Preston made a suckling pig, and Lita Albuquerque made this astonishing couscous in the shape of a starfish, and people made great stuff. So we made a few $100s, but we met people. And one person came, this woman walks in, looking like she'd just been dressed by Coco Chanel. It's like walks into this slum of a site with, you know, and I walk up to her and I say, I gotta find out who this woman is. We hit it off immediately, and she became one of our first board members and wrote checks and brought amazing people with money. Because I knew right away we had to get money. And I thought the selling point for Lace could be, this is such a fascinating place because it's controlled by artists, that's the selling point. That you make an asset of what is operationally actually a deficit, but that became an asset in terms of marketing. So it's kind of picking up all of this stuff. And then there were some tensions through the transition, because as people got knocked off the CETA paycheck, there wasn't income from, there was no grants. It was, well, we did get NEA originally, but there was so little money. So I was the first person to actually be on the payroll of the nonprofit, which we achieved, I think, in early 1980. And the board was willing to secure my salary. I think it was $10,000. No. Sheila Tepper. So our first board, so the first board was members from the original collective, and this was whoever was left, we all talked about who would represent this group. And we knew we had to augment the artists. You couldn't just have artists. But the bylaws were that a majority of the members of the board of directors would have to be artists. I think we had 13. So we had Robert Gildamontes, Alexis Sauer, who was an Otis person, myself, I don't remember who the other ones were. Maybe Megan. And then we found people, I found people on the outside. Sheila and our attorney, Sidney Tillum, who was there before I got there. Somehow, I think Alex Sauer got him. And where did I meet this guy, Greg Laux? Oh, somehow I met this woman named Bet Laux, and then met her husband. Her husband was a banker at this bank, which is long gone, called Manufacturers Hanover Trust. Hancock Park, WASP, whatever, you know, like the Brooks Brothers, fell in love with Lace. It was just completely uncanny, you know. He became a board member, and we had this banker on the board. And then Sheila was able to get Touche Ross, which was at that point a big accounting firm, no longer exists, Major, one of the big 8 as they were called then, to do our books. So we were slowly building a kind of credibility in terms of how it was run, which was an infrastructure that we were able to, for instance, then when we started applying to the NEA for grants, it was super impressive. And Sheila was in Washington for something, and she said, well, why don't I go visit the staff at the NEA? So she goes, and I get a call from someone at the NEA, and they say, we just had a visit from your board member. We can't believe it. You know, that you guys are rocking with people like this. So we started, and then I'll never forget this call from John Baldessari. He called me and said, I just came back from DC. I was on, at this point it was called Artist Space was the category. He said, you did very well, and you're going to be okay for a few years with the NEA. And I just about shit in my pants, because it was like, I couldn't believe it. So we were starting to get credibility with funders. I thought the programs were pretty good. We established programming via artist committees. So there are two things that I thought were really critical to LACE. One is artist control, which included the curatorial process of these committees. And two, we set up equal programming units of exhibitions, performance, and video. That was in 1980. So from the beginning, we were committed to those three genres. Had a very active performance program, the most active in LA by far. And we had them, Long Beach had an established and very serious video program. But I'd say we had the more kind of the raunchier, cutting edge, more raw video program. So those to me are the two that I'm most proud of. One was the sense of that it's an artist institution, not run well for them, but run by them. And then two, that there were these three genres. And then we did other things. We didn't stay to that. Like we did something like we did, how do you get more artists involved in the dialogue with the public? Because the programming can only accommodate so many. So we ran studio tours. And as downtown was growing as a neighborhood for artists, and galleries, actually, there was a lot of galleries by '81. These tours were phenomenally successful. You know, we did one, and then we had the weekend of the tours, we did the opening of the Downtown Artist Show, and we had guest curators. We had Baldessari one year. The first show that was up when I came there was Judy Pfaff. She had done a beautiful installation. There was a beautiful Larry Pittman painting show, I think in '81. Double X, a woman's collective, had a great show there. There was a few very stellar performances that I remember. Min Ota, this brilliant Japanese dancer, very moving. Tony Labat did an installation performance piece the weekend of this big downtown. By the time all the galleries were down there in '82, and they did this like gallery event where thousands of people, and the mayor spoke and Joe Wax spoke, and thousands of people were coming through LACE, and that's when we had Tony Labat, and he was doing a piece that connected the roof, which was his beach, to the gallery where he had a swimming pool, and he would lay up on the beach until he couldn't take it anymore, and then run down to cool off in the pool. He did it naked. So we were having all of these thousands of people come through, and he asked me what to do about I said, this is LACE. If any institution in LA can have this artist running around naked, it's us. So he did that. And that was kind of fun. And he had a video camera up on his little beach, and then so you could see the monitors, so people would come in and see this guy sunbathing. They didn't realize that it was live. And then all of a sudden he comes running down, just voraciously anxious to get into the pool, because the program he had set for himself was lay in the sun until he literally couldn't bear it. It was this kind of, you know, durational test. And then he literally just came running down with skin frying and beads of sweat, ran into the pool. People were like, oh my God, that was real, or that is real. That was good. And that to me was the spirit of Lace. Yes, I curated with Linda Shear in exchange with New York, with Artist Space. And we brought Jeff Koons out. So I'm really proud of that. We had a 3-stack wet dry Hoover in Lace. And no one knew, I mean, Jeff Koons, who the fuck? So that was very cool. I liked that. And he was a riot. He was just, I went to visit him, and I didn't know who he was. And Roberta Smith was doing one of the essays, and I said, who were the artists I want, you know, who do you recommend that I would know of? So she said, well, there's this guy, Jeff Koons. He's kind of interesting. I think he's worth checking out. So I went to visit him. He was a bond trader at the time and had an apartment, a studio apartment. I'm going in cold. The guy blew me away. It was such a nutcase, just like the energy. It was like I almost was blown out the window.
He was a salesperson.
Yes, he was a salesperson, and he was selling his work. And I didn't get it completely, because some of it was so, the line between the appropriation and the reconstituted meaning that he was hoping was occurring at some point was questionable to me. Curatorial discernment was hard to maintain in a committee structure. It becomes kind of irrelevant. It's a whole other system of evaluation. And I would say we were privileging the democracy and the participation over curatorial discernment, which I find more interesting, frankly. So I think the why we were able to get the artists we did was basically it was their friends on these committees, or people they know through their own practice. You know, Bruce Yamamoto was even then well known nationally, so as was Nancy Buchanan, Jackie Apple. So if an invitation came from Lace via the video committee or the performance committee or the exhibition committee, it had a degree of legitimacy to it. And it was within one's own kind of cohort. And at that point, the notion of a career was not as fanatical as it is now. And the hierarchy of value was not as established. You know, people were, I would say, more casual about what a career was than they are today.